Hello, everyone. Welcome to Human's Fireside Chat with Coalfire. I'm Alexa Levine, Product Marketing Manager at Human, and I will be moderating this conversation. Joining me today are Jeff Zittimer, Senior Director of Project Management at Human, and Jason Wikenczy, Principal Payments and Cloud Advisory at Coalfire, a respected QSA company that recently completed an evaluation of human security for PCI DSS compliance with version 4's new browser script requirements, which are 6.4.3 and 11.6.1. Please feel free to put any questions in the chat during this session, and we'll answer them at the end. Okay, so before we dive into Coalfire's evaluation, let's start by reviewing what the new browser script requirements actually are. Jason, can you give us a quick overview of these new requirements?
Thank you, Alexa. So with the PCI DSS, there's the broader goal of protecting cardholder data throughout every stage of the payment process. And that's going to include the client or the consumer side to the best of our ability. So with requirement 643 and 1161, they were introduced with version 4 of the standard. And the idea for those is to shield against threats to web-based payment systems, because those are going to be vulnerable to those client consumer side attacks. So inherently with e-commerce, code will be executed at client side. And since we as payment entities have limited control, if any, of the consumer side, so personal computers, smartphones, etc., the new payment page security requirements are intended to help mitigate those risks with that blind spot. With 643 in particular, it's looking for a comprehensive inventory of all scripts that are running on payment pages. So that's required. Organizations have to justify the necessity of each script so that only authorized scripts are being executed. And it aims to prevent unauthorized code injection and mitigate risks of malicious scripts. 1161 focuses on detection and response to unauthorized changes on the payment page themselves, along with the associated security impacting headers. Security impacting something that was clarified with the latest revision, which is 4.0.1 of the DSS. So the requirements are just a direct response, given there's a prevalence of attacks like something called MageCart, and it's, again, where malicious code's injected into websites just for the purpose of stealing cardholder data.
Great, thank you. So speaking of security impacting HTTP headers in PCI DSS 4.0.1, Jeff, can you explain a little more about how these fit in?
Yes, thank you for asking that. So what are HTTP headers, right? So that the browser talks to the server in a language called HTTP, and headers are things that travel back and forth with those requests. Now, specifically, what they're referring to with security impacting headers is when the server sends the browser the HTML of the payment page or the page that embeds the payment page, if it's a third-party payment service provider's page. Within those headers, the server can transfer certain information to the browser with various security policies for the browser to enforce. And so the idea there is of tracking, monitoring changes to the headers, alerting personnel to those changes, is that if those security headers are part of your security posture, either because it's part of how you are securing the cardholder number on the page itself, or it's potentially part of how you are building a perimeter around the area that you are securing and scoping for PCI, then you're going to want to monitor that as part of a malicious attack, nobody has disabled any of those controls, or has, or even potentially your developers maybe turned off a control as part of testing. They couldn't get something to work, and then they never came back and turned it back on. So PCI DSS expects you to monitor for those out of band as received by the consumer browser, and be able to alert to any kind of change like that. That could be an indication of compromise, or an indication of compromise just to one of your controls. Another, I guess, interesting twist is that a sophisticated attacker could potentially even use some of those security headers as a way to, as part of the attack against you. So as a way, for example, to block some of the other security controls that you have. So that's why tracking these is very important. Monitoring for them, making sure they haven't changed, and if they have changed, looking at it and saying, okay, did something bad happen, or is this a development we were expecting, and therefore authorize that change. As just one example, CSP comes a lot, so it's mentioned also as a potential tool to use to meet 643 and 1161. CSP, content security policy, is a very common tool to use to say my website is only allowed to talk to, for example, these websites, or only allowed to load scripts from these particular websites. And so the browser can, depending on the mode, either tell you that somebody's violating the CSP and just report it to you, or it can actually block that access very much in a sort of, you're not on the allow list, so that's it. We're just going to block that outgoing request from the browser. And so it's a very useful tool for that control. We hear some questions of customers assuming that PCI expects them to have CSP, and that's a bit of a misconception. So it's kind of, PCI gives you a lot of examples of things that you could use, tools that you could use. You can use other tools as well. You're not required to use any specific tool listed. If CSP is part of your posture, though, or any other security impacting header, then you also definitely need to monitor for it in 1161.
Got it. Thanks. Another question we get a lot is, are organizations that use a third-party payment service provider de-scoped from these requirements? Jeff, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so there's we see a bit of a continuum. I guess the short answer is that no, they are not de-scoped. I guess at the very bare minimum, if you've really outsourced everything, then you're still like kind of a merchant as far as the merchant banks and credit card companies are concerned, you still need at least an attestation of compliance from whoever you are using. But then if you do already have your operations, and then you have your own operations, but even though you never touch cardholder data, it's all handled by the third-party payment service provider embedded in your site, you still obviously need to be PCI compliant, but then also you are required to meet 643 and 1161 for the simple reason that the scripts that are running on your page that embeds that payment page still have nearly unmitigated access to basically anything there, and they'll still be able, bottom line, to steal cardholder data.
Got it. Jason, what is the deadline for all of this, and what are the consequences of missing it? Jason, I think you're on mute.
Thank you for that. So for 643 and 1161, those requirements are considered best practices through March 31st of 2025. So they're not mandatory, but strongly recommended in that early implementation would be a prudent approach, as well as a strategic one. Early assessment can be used as a tool. So even if you've got controls that are in place, but maybe they fall short, they really shouldn't result in non-compliance because the controls themselves are currently still best practice. But the lessons learned through that assessment can test the water, so to speak, and you can apply that going forward. So certainly helps with better preparation. It's now after March 31st, 25 comes April Fool's Day. And whether that's intentional or not, I don't know. But if you fail to meet those requirements at that point, then likely that's going to result in a non-compliant status until that's resolved. And it does carry the usual suspects for consequences. So, I mean, you've got the potential for fines, the potential for breaking the ability to process, reputation, the rest. But I think really above and beyond compliance or non-compliance is the security aspect. It's really jumping on it as early as possible, just because of it being web-based. The security footprint's huge, and certainly the consequences of a breach of data is far more dire than non-compliant status. That's
great. Yeah, we'll definitely jump a little more into that security beyond compliance piece later. But for now, let's dive into Coalfire's evaluation of human. So first off, Jason, what is a product applicability guide, and can you describe Coalfire's process in that?
So a product, I'm always wondering which way to say it.
Did I do it wrong?
A product applicability guide, which is why we call it a PAG. It's part of Coalfire's product guidance lineup, which includes very closely aligned engagements like security benchmarks and verified reference architectures. But a PAG is very much tailored to fit. It's a tailored to fit engagement, which we perform through the eyes of an assessor. We go through detailed analysis of, it could be a product, a platform, or a service, right? Against a particular framework, a standard, or even we'll call it a security topic. So maybe something that doesn't have anything regulatory or specific standard or framework associated. Privacy is kind of an example of that. AI is, maybe an example of that. But a PEG essentially, it translates between complexities of technologies to any associated requirements or objectives. For payment entities, their customers, even QSAs, I think a PEG's invaluable for all of them. In that it demonstrates how a given solution can contribute to those particular requirements, to those compliance efforts and initiatives. The engagement itself can also identify gaps, so improvements for whatever solutions being reviewed or tested. And then adopters of that solution can leverage a PAG to optimize the use of that technology, right? It can also be used to help streamline the assessment process, just because byproduct of it is a higher resolution of what those shared responsibilities look like between the different parties, along with other, control and implementation considerations. Building a compliance roadmap, is another way to leverage that. So we're part of illustrating what a solution can do, is also highlighting, what it doesn't do. Again, integrating the product with existing security type infrastructure, workflow type integrations. And I mean, it's also used to help justify compliance decisions. My highlight there would be scoping decisions. because certainly we take a look at what's in scope and also what we consider not in scope, right? So we really do a deep dive into the solution. We actually use what we're looking at. We use it as an adopter, fill in the framework there that would apply. So we assume we're adopter with any of those given frameworks or standards that we'd be subject to. We map not only the functions but features to specific security requirements and objectives. And then we provide recommendations how to use that product effectively. So again, I mean, it really it's meant to serve a lot of purposes, but I think across the board really facilitates informed decisions.
Great. So now that we've gone over the background, what did Coalfire find when you evaluated Human?
3 questions in a row.
Lucky you.
Right. So when we evaluated Human Security's client defense solution, so the security first approach was clear. And certainly being a proponent of driving compliance through security, the solution tended to exceed the spirit and intent of these new requirements. And that was or is certainly commendable. To that point, there's a very proactive approach to securing online payment pages and mitigation of risks, especially with the continuous monitoring. And that type of preventive approach goes above and beyond, currently those requirements as written, which do have more detective-based or frequency-based components to them. So we wear different hats, right? So when we're looking at this, we put on our QSA hat, we put on our service provider hat, right? And as a user, there was the client enablement through the platform was refreshing. Sometimes we see like more of a tactical mapping, so it's very. Here are the functions, and here are how they map to technical components of the requirement. In this case, we really saw that enablement for operational effectiveness. So there are operational components to these requirements, like there are governance or documentation. So the operational effectiveness certainly was a key point finding, along with helping simplify the assessment process. So putting the QSA hat on, or putting adopter's hat on as well, is, hey, what are the artifacts that can be generated? How do we evidence this? Can you walk through it in an audit scenario? And is an assessor able to get to the information that they need? So that that stood out as well. So the visibility, the telemetry, policy enforcement, the ability for automation there, workflow integration. These were all key points that went above and beyond a lot of things that we usually see beyond that meeting technical components of a requirement only. So as far as like script inventory, authorization, and monitoring, right? I mean, those are key things. The other point to drive home here, and we kind of spoke to that earlier when we talked about scope and third-party service providers, is there's always going to be that ownership component. So I think that it really sets users up well to make the most out of that shared responsibility.
Great, thanose. I appreciate that review. And now I'll give you a break from the questions. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff.
I guess to add a little bit from our perspective going through the PAG process, obviously we're very excited about the findings, and thank you for those. But I think a big part of the value was also that these new requirements came out, I think, versus all of the other new PCI requirements. These are probably among the most exotic, different, like a whole new like concept for a lot of companies, QSAs that have never really considered the client side. And so to a large degree, when we developed the product, we had to make a lot of judgment calls based on our security DNA, and with expert advice from between people like Troy Leach and then a whole lot of other, a whole lot of QSA companies, people who were passionate about the client side and provided a lot of feedback, and we could build that in. But then and I don't want to name them all because I'll forget a bunch, but you know who you are. But sort of all of those were very much based on discussions, demos, etc. And having a QSA company who taking the same mindset that they would take to our customers to make sure that our customers comply, and what would they look for in the customers' various methods, tools, etc., to meet the compliance requirements, that they essentially I don't know what the right terminology is here, but kind of validated and provided feedback that we could act upon to those various I guess, guesses that we had to make, or judgment calls that we had to make. And so having that extra, let's call it validation, is very good for us, and also helped drive the product forward in areas where it might have been missing a couple of things.
Great. So on that note, can you give us a quick overview of what the human product does and how it works?
Yeah. So at a high level, just starting with the value of the product. So again, we have that security DNA, but when we looked at the PCI requirements, the first thing that struck us is there's a lot of work in here that the council needs merchants, payment service providers to go through on an ongoing basis. This isn't just a prep for your audit once a year, email your developers, get back some list of tags that they added for scripts. Like, you actually need to go into all the third and fourth parties and all the way down the tree and monitor what's actually happening in production as received by the consumer browser. There's a lot of things here that would be difficult for most companies and would be very time consuming, both to set this up front to just prepare, and then on an ongoing basis to just do all the activities that are expected. Now, of course, all that effort has a lot of value, right? Because it is a real attack out there in the wild, and so you're drastically mitigating the risk of that attack by following these PCI requirements. But still, there's a lot of effort and like extra budget that you'll need, and extra people looking at it, and more coordination across different departments. It's a team sport. And so we built the whole product or the whole module within the existing product for PCI DSS as how do we streamline this process? How do we simplify it as much as possible? Just deploying us and having everything that you need, and then managing this team sport on an ongoing basis with integrations to tools and various workflows that companies use, and various automations that companies have. And then on top of that, it's simple, and I did the sort of baseline security expectations that PCI has from me. How do we then layer on top of that the existing security that we've always had, the much deeper insight and the ability to set up automated policies to block very granular risks from scripts, or very, very granular behaviors of scripts that you may not want, while still allowing their business value on the site. So I want the script on the payment page, but I don't want it to be able to do various risky things, whether it's doing them now or not. And so now I'm able to set up policies and set it up that way that set them up to block and protect, going beyond the various activities that PCI is expecting. In addition, some of these policies I can also use to automate some of the approvals. So if a certain vendor gives me an AOC, maybe I don't actually need to review every single change of theirs, but the AOC kind of means I can trust them for those changes. So I will set up a policy that says just auto-authorize whenever these scripts change. And so all this ongoing noise of script changes that they happen all the time, completely out of control of the merchants. Now that the changes recorded and the sort of automated action to authorize it is recorded, but all those alerts aren't firing off. And when I go into the dashboard, I can see that there's been progress made, but not necessarily that I have a to-do item added to my list, because that was already handled by the automated process.
Got it. So on the note of speaking about security beyond compliance, I think that's something worth digging into, just because, we're talking about PCI, but the goal isn't compliance, it's security. So Jeff, wondering if you can elaborate kind of on the difference between achieving compliance and securing cardholder data, and also what's worth securing beyond cardholder data.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't think this topic is sort of foreign to anyone, right? The goal of PCI compliance isn't to be PCI compliant. Obviously, it's to protect cardholder data. If you follow the requirements while trying to achieve that outcome, then they will definitely help you secure cardholder data. But in some cases, it's also possible to kind of go through the motions, be able to check the box and not necessarily achieve the security benefit. So from that perspective, we try to make sort of both parts easy, right? So you sort of came because it's really simple to get the checkbox, but because of all this automation and the automated security policies, we're making it very easy for you to also get that security beyond and again, block the activities you don't want while keeping the actual scripts there that you do want. So you can sort of keep the CISO happy and the chief marketing officer happy at the same time. So that's very much on that security beyond compliance. And then the other thing to remember is maybe until now, your organization hasn't looked at the client side as a thread, but now that you see and understand everything that can happen on the client side, it's very difficult to unsee it. And then you start asking yourself, okay, what other sensitive data is there in the browser that these scripts can skim in the same way that they can skim cardholder data? Maybe even easier, because I don't even have a third-party payment service provider via iframe there that does offer some protection if implemented properly. In the case of login credentials, for example, those maybe aren't quite secured the same way. Same thing, the contact us form that has a lot of PII on it that you may not want. Kind of just every company out there on the internet having, and you may have a privacy compliance issue by the fact that they do have that access, especially if the various extra forms are things like create a medical appointment that might fall under HIPAA. Create any kind of contact us that has something of a bit more of a personal nature than besides just having my email. They may have something personal about me that, again, GDPR sort of defines as extra sensitive data, things like sexual orientation, if I remember correctly. So all those are very good reasons to secure your client side, not just because PCI said so, or not even to secure just cardholder data, because that's probably among the most valuable, but that now you understand and you already have a methodology and a tool where you can secure everything else.
Got it. Jason, I gave you a break, but now turning it back over to you. Can you share some best practices to achieve PCI compliance?
So, one of the overriding themes of DSS4 being risk analysis throughout. Certainly for these particular requirements, which I'll keep the response to. Assessment of the current there's a risk analysis of the current script environment is first and foremost. So identifying, what those scripts are, understanding what their functions and intent are, and then, assessing those accordingly. For multiple reasons, primarily, and then first off, is scope, and understanding, the scope, and then prioritization as well. That's going to be key. When you're taking a look at those, certainly any associated data sensitivity is going to be a key factor. The criticality to payment flow, or payment processing, script source, right? So is it third party or not? And then even complexity, certainly is another one. So things that are more complex, perhaps are going to take more complex operations to contend with should something happen. Avoid dialing in on the two control requirements. You don't want to get the tunnel vision there. There's a much broader scope to those two requirements throughout the DSS. So up front, not even just like in parallel as part of that process, is making sure that this is these are integrated with existing functions, existing workflows, be part of the process, right? So you've got other components to the standard like supply chain management, vulnerability management, patch management, incident response, code review, developer and awareness training. I mean, they're all going to have components of documentation. So even making sure that those documents are part of your other PCI document review processes, right? So from very start is making sure that those integrations are there. Tunnel vision on the particular components has a potential to lead to some gaps later on. And then along with that goes people, right? So cross-function, make sure that you've got IT, you've got security, you've got audit and compliance, you've got the right people and all the people you need for that job throughout.
Got it. Jeff, do you want to weigh in on that at all and kind of share, what's unique about securing the client side and, what things to think about there?
Yeah, I think to an extent also to kind of summarize or add, there's a lot that needs to be done and there isn't a lot of time by the end of March deadline. 8 months away for a company with maybe a central security team and multiple business units. You need to get the tool deployed. You need to train people. You need to create the process. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to be done. So it should probably get started. And the second part is, ideally, you need to look at your environment, decide what's in scope, what's out of scope, and after that, it starts from, okay, I got to get my inventory, right? And that's again where we come in and help a lot. Is that deploying us is just getting a JavaScript snippet onto your website, and then we auto discover for you what looks like a payment page, and then within each payment page, what are all of the scripts that would then be in your inventory. So by just deploying our JavaScript code, you're already getting that starting point of these are all the scripts on my site. These are all the vendors on my site. Here are descriptions of what these vendors generally do, which would give the security operator an idea of who in the org do I need to talk to figure this out, who's everybody I need to get in the room to align on what's the process for reviewing this, and then to actually potentially review these. So all these various scripts in my inventory, do they need to be there, yes or no? And then if no, then get them removed. All of that is again, stuff that generally speaking is work, especially for a large org, to get all that coordinated. And again, we simplify from just a very simple deployment to giving you all that visibility and all the workflow tools to integrate into all those other requirements that Jason mentioned, like incident response. So we'll integrate with your Splunk or Datadog as an example, and anything on vulnerability management, ticket management, for example, right? Open the Jira tickets if that's what you use, to get them in front of the right people who should do the evaluations and send back the answer, authorized or not authorized. So sort of building us into all of those workflows that customers would have for how all of these requirements come together. Specifically to the what's unique about client-side scripts, the number one issue is they're critical for all these online websites, but they're completely out of your control. So yes, you may have added tags for certain vendors, and then your developers added tags for certain developer libraries, but then scripts could be bringing other scripts, and those are going directly to the client side from whatever third or fourth party. They're not even traveling through you, so they just completely bypass all of your other security controls and tools. And so while a lot of coordination should be done up front to say, hey, we've contracted with this new vendor, let's look at what they're going to do, let's decide if we want to authorize this, yes or no, you are still going to constantly be surprised by what turns up on your website, either maliciously or not. Just because some developers made changes that they needed to make, things will change outside of your control. And so one of the areas that I think is really valuable that 401 also clarified is the impracticality of pre-authorizing everything necessarily. And so they rather say, right, if something already arrived, then make sure that you authorize it. I don't remember the exact wording, but in a timely manner or as soon as possible. But of course, ideally, most of the changes at least shouldn't surprise you. You should be prepared for them and authorize them in advance. And sort of that maybe describes why client side, sort of as a discipline, is very different from other areas that security operators and maybe PCI DSS is more accustomed to. But beyond that, just because people aren't used to it yet, you may not have the skill set in the company to necessarily understand everything. So again, having our product interface be a lot less technical in that area of the product for PCI, so you have the information that you need to decide without necessarily being a JavaScript developer or a security operator. Still, from the customer's perspective, there is going to be a skills gap to close there. There's going to be a bit of a process and tools gap as well, now just with everything being new.
Makes sense. So thank you so much, guys. Now I'm going to turn it over to questions from the audience. So please get them in the chat if you want your questions answered. But I'll start with the few we have in so far. So first off, how can organizations identify and prioritize critical HTTP headers? Jeff, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I'd say if the organizations are our customers, then they deploy our sensor on their site, and then our sensor reports back, these are the security impacting headers that we've detected on your payment pages. And so just like rather than messaging all your developers and asking what my scripts are, and same thing, what headers do we have, deploying Code Defender will give you both your scripts and your headers, and then we'll give you the monitoring of any time a script or a header changes in a way that you need to know about. You'll get that alert, and you'll get the information you need to be able to decide, am I authorizing this change, yes or no? For those who are not our customers, I mean, there are other tools out there that do various scanning and potentially. Really, if you're evaluating tools and vendors, you should make sure that they actually cover this headers requirement, because a lot of them talk a lot about scripts and possibly support scripts, but then headers is a bit of a new discipline also for those who've been doing client-side security for a while. They may not cover the headers requirements, so you may need to come up with some other alternative to do it. and to get that visibility and monitoring. At the very high level, just to know what you're up against, the developer opening, developer tools, if you know what you're looking for, you can navigate to the payment page and at least get the initial, okay, these are some of the headers that were loaded and these look like they're security impacting. So you have a point to start, but then of course you will need to kind of maintain an inventory for it, even though it's not written in those words. And of course, monitor for any time that they change.
So actually, Jeff, I've got a question on that. So typically there's a set of headers that would be considered security relevant. But then are there headers that would not typically be considered security relevant that actually may based on use case?
I'd say hypothetically, probably.
Okay,
So the extent of of what comes out of the box from us is the ones that our research team has identified and various thought leaders have talked about as well. From an ongoing forward basis, as more and more QSAs, security consultants, security experts at companies digest these requirements, they are probably going to flag additional ones, and so we're set up. We can already have all the infrastructure to say, oh yeah, let's just for a sensor, pick up this one as well and send it back, and then it'll make its way through the portal, and then in the portal follow all the same kind of process and functionality that we've already built in.
Thanks.
Got it. Okay, next question. Let me try to read this one. A QSA mentioned that if you use an HTTP redirect, then 6.4.3 and 11.6.1 become non-applicable. Do you have thoughts on this?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Sure. A QSA mentioned to one of our audience members that if you use an HTTP redirect, then 6.4.3 and 11.6.1 don't apply to you. So wondering if you guys have any thoughts on that.
All right, so I'm gonna say that by the way that was worded, I'd say no. But I can't. It seems like I can never not say it depends. So the idea of HTTP redirect, the DSS states that so HTTP uses like JavaScript and VB script, I think, as code where markup like HTTP wouldn't be considered. So I think if it's traditional redirect in that sense, then no. But if a redirect is being done via scripting, which is certainly possible, then I would say yes. And then I think my third answer to that is, redirects are something that, from again, this is the security over compliance perspective, right? That redirects are something that really need to be looked at from a security standpoint, regardless of compliance, non-compliance, because it does provide another vector. So I think that's my three answers.
So maybe not as streamlined as you were hoping, Andy, but it depends. Jeff, did you have anything to add there? Or should I move on?
I think Jason covered that pretty well.
Okay, great. Next question. PCI DSS states that authorization could be automated. What are a few guiding principles there?
Okay, I'll start with this. So I would say semi-automated, meaning, again, one of the driving factors or driving objectives of the DSS as continues to evolve is that it's something that's continuous, that there is continuous improvement, that there's continuous feedback. So while workflow might be automated, it's still going to need, I guess for the sake of this conversation, human input. But yeah, I mean, so there has to be that ownership. There has to be the logic justification behind that, right? Now, certainly learning models would help with that, but it still needs oversight. It still needs that input. I think that's probably what sticks out in my mind first.
Yeah, I think I was happy for Jason to take this question first, because what I typically say is, here are a few things that sound reasonable to us, but you're going to need to be able to justify that logic to your QSA. I think that's kind of the bottom line also, is, and it depends. I will say things that sound reasonable are, again, a vendor from whom you have an AOC, and they generally probably have a much more mature security program in many cases than you might. Then it might be okay. Maybe for some of your first party scripts, if they are you have a very well controlled process for those kind of per other PCI requirements, then maybe potentially you can automate some of that. But again, the kind of bottom line principle is you need to be able to justify, rationalize why you've decided to automate each thing, and it's definitely aligned with your QSA type topic.
Makes sense. Okay, one last question. What are the key metrics that organizations should track to measure the effectiveness of their client-side security program?
All right. So I mean, the objective of the requirements, right? Mitigate incidents, right? So incident metrics, your typical incident metrics that you rely on. That going back to that whole integration with the broader perspective and tangent or adjacent controls in the DSS, being able to flag those to track them. So if they're script related or resultant of, certainly source, right? So are those from third-party scripts? Are those internal? Certainly that provides then visibility into, do you have a supply chain management problem? If I didn't mention that before as one of those areas. So script compliance. Are they doing what they're supposed to do? Certainly as part of that. Vulnerability type metrics. And I mean, in reality, although it may not be directly related at all to the DSS, but certainly user experience, because I mean, that's probably one of the biggest gripes that you see for these 643 and 1161 is, that how do we do this without affecting user experience? So I think that's going to be pretty important as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question was client side in general, but there's, I'd say PCI versus client side. It's a good question. A couple of things, if starting with just PCI. So the inventory with written justification as to why everything needs to be there, at least to me, gets to a do some housekeeping, right? Not every science experiment from 5 years ago should still be there. And then like various other things that are still really valuable, but do they really need to be on a payment page, right? You may want to remove those. So one metric could be just what is the size of the inventory, and potentially, right, when you first enable something like human security or start whatever program, you'll have some number, and ideally you should be looking to drive that number down. Another thing potentially to look at is like time to close various or time to review of the various alerts. So you now did have a script that changed or a new script that was discovered. Like how long do things linger in there or age in there before somebody reviews them and then signs off that the change is okay? Potentially another one to look at and have some management around. There's also ideally, right, like the marketing team didn't just contract with a new marketing analytics vendor and never tell you about it, and then you discover it because human all of a sudden tells you, hey, you've got this marketing script now running on your site. So another potential metric is how many kind of completely new scripts or new vendors like surprised us, and ideally that should be 0. So those are some ideas around PCI. For client-side defense, then I think also ideally you want to limit take some of these learnings over, right? Ideally, also the inventory, you should do some cleanup. Ideally, you should not let incidents, alerts linger there for too long, at least not, say, high and medium ones, and have various internal metrics, SLAs, track some of those. I think there's actually a lot that the client-side security space can learn and already has learned from just the way PCI worded it, and take a lot of those learnings over to client-side security more broadly. Quick on the experience side. So yeah, the JavaScripts, a lot of them are there because they drive a much richer experience and more interactive experience for the end user. At the same time, I think that housekeeping of removing a bunch of scripts from there, you may actually find that performance improves a lot. So there are going to be some experience benefits, side effects as well. Maybe sweeten the pill a bit.
Thank you. I know I said last question, but one just came in so quickly. If you can, does your product or does Human's product also check the integrity of scripts? The others are inventory check.
Yeah, absolutely. So I talked a lot about how we auto-discover the inventory, but then even after scripts have been approved or been authorized, we continue to monitor them for changes and changes in integrity. What we actually monitor, which from our experience makes also the most sense, is the behavioral integrity of scripts. Meaning if a script just changes, but we're sitting there in the real consumer's browser, seeing how they are interacting with the browser, if they're not actually changing, triggering any behavior that could be used as part of an attack, then we just don't generate that noise for you. Because the reality is scripts change all the time, and the same scripts are often sometimes created dynamically or loaded completely dynamically. You get a different script every time, or this different script behavior every time. And if you actually just did an integrity check of, let's just take a hash and just let you know, then frankly, you wouldn't be getting a lot of value out of human security or this exercise to begin with, because you'd just be getting alerted all the time to every single change that was observed on the script. And there's just no way, even if you hired a whole team of people, that they would all be able to review all of these. So you end up just having people just click authorize on every change instead of actually looking at, do I care or not? And so by monitoring that behavioral integrity, it's only the changes that could actually pose a risk, and the rest of the changes not necessarily. Now, having said that, if there are any of you in the audience who think that hash requirement or not requirement, that hashing approach is absolutely necessary, and that's the only thing that'll work for your compliance program, we want to hear from you. It's not a difficult feature for us to build. It's actually a lot simpler than most other things that we do. It's just one that we would very reluctantly build because we just don't think it'll help your actual security or compliance. But nevertheless, if somebody insists that they want it, and if there I guess, enough of the market out there as people digest these requirements more, are still convinced that they need that hash check, then it's pretty simple for us to add.
Great, thank you. And thank you both for joining today. All registrants will receive the Coalfire white paper, tag, as well as the recording of this session after the session is over. And we also just want to shout that Human Security will be at Black Hat if you would like to discuss PCI more, as well as the PCI community meeting in September. So with that, thank you everyone for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day.